All right. Rebekah, this is your second time on the show. And I loved the first time just because I thought it was very unique what you're doing and you were awesome. So thanks for coming back.
Thanks so much for having me, Darian. It was so lovely to be here last time, and I'm excited. Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. So, how about a refresher? I think this would be good for people who maybe didn't listen to that episode, which was a long time ago now. The project you were working on. And so let's start with that. What was the basis for that?
Yeah. So when we talked last, I had just started my field work in the Peruvian Amazon. I was there for 1 year. That was part of my PhD doctoral requirement. I have now finished my field work in the Amazon, writing up my thesis. We're at the tail end of that, gathered together all my data, looked at what was going on. So yeah, since we last talked, a whole bunch of stuff has happened.
So tell me a little bit about like your impressions of the field work because you were basically really deep into kind of this process. But after it's been done, what's been your impressions, your reflection about it?
Yeah. So after the field work's been completed,
Yeah.
yeah, so my field work, my relationships that I've built in the Amazon, I built on 8 years of prior relationships, so quite deep. I work mainly with locals and local settings, so I'm investigating hallucinogenic substances and the local medical system, which involves the intake of ayahuasca, very intense hallucinogens. In recent years, in the last few decades or so, more recently in the last 2 decades, we've seen an explosion of tourist retreats in the Amazon. And from what I've observed, and I have observed the tourist settings as well, they're very different to local settings, and to the point where these rituals, I would need to investigate them both separately. So, for the purposes of my research and to build on these 8 years of relationships that I have, and also that I find it quite important to study rituals in their most naturalistic settings, I worked with locals in local settings. So, what were my impressions of my fieldwork? In regards to the practices themselves, unsurprisingly, it's a lot more vast than I initially anticipated. I did anticipate it to be a lot more vast than I already thought, but it went even beyond that. And I should also note at this point, I've done about 27 months of total field work in the Amazon and spent time in the Amazon. And that's based over 4 separate visits. Yeah, so it's really building up on this long term relationship I've got with the jungle and the people. In terms of the general landscape of the Amazon, definitely feel the effects of malpractice as well. I think that's really important to highlight. I think we might have talked about this briefly in our last podcast. It was quite a while ago, but you definitely do feel and see the effects of malpractice. Even today, just before I hopped on this podcast, I had a quick browse of my newsfeed. And another article had come out about a known shaman who has now been found to be practicing in a bad way. And at this point, I don't blink an eye. I actually just don't blink an eye. I really don't. And that's really sad. Very grateful to have these lovely, nurturing relationships that have gone on for so long with my research communities. But something that really screamed out to me was that there is this other side um, to the Amazon and these practices. And I almost want to extend that beyond just the Amazon and hallucinogens there to other areas, but those aren't in my areas of expertise. That's just me hypothesizing over there.
There's a lot there, a whole bunch there. So you just mentioned. All right, where do I start? Let me start here. Let me rewind, hit the rewind button. When you say that there are two different, let's say, retreats, psychedelic based retreats, what are the main things separating these two different versions of this, touristy versus local?
Yep, great question. What are the two differences? One of the chapter titles of my thesis is quite literally Bones of the Ceremony. And that gets the real what are the fundamental building blocks that are required to create a safe, in this case, ayahuasca space, but it could be a psychedelic space, et cetera, et cetera. What I've noticed and observed with the tourist settings is that there are the building blocks. You might have 80% of them. You might even have 100% of them present at these ceremonies, but there's a lot of extra fluff added that doesn't actually have any ritual significance. It doesn't actually connect. It doesn't actually help forward the ritual. It doesn't help facilitate a clean and safe space. It's extra noise. It's performative. It's a little bit more performative is what I've
What
noticed.
do you mean by that? Extra fluff?
The extra fluff. What I mean by that, in these ceremonies that I've been observing, and at this point participated in about 200 ayahuasca ceremonies across different, yeah, so around 200 ayahuasca ceremonies if I'm taking more full dietas as well, which is an extended process of food restriction and behavior restriction with different plants. And these are with different indigenous groups across the Amazon. Um, they can be quite basic in their structural form in that you need some songs, you have some fragrances, you have a general progression of the ceremony. Whereas the tourist ceremony, there might be a lot of extra noise, for instance. I think instruments might be a really easy way to describe that point, actually. So sometimes tourist ceremonies can have an abundance of musical instruments, an array of instruments. And that's fine in some cases. Some instruments are compatible with the plants. But the whole purpose of the plants, and now we're going to switch worldviews and we're just going to try on the Amazonian hat here. I'm going to give it a shot. The whole purpose of the plants is that each plant has their own unique song, right? And that's seen as a way of communicating with the plant. It's not necessarily for the purposes of the human, it's more for the purposes of the plant. And the facilitator is the one who knows how to do this. And they've established this through long-term apprenticeship, 5 years plus, and spending time with the plants themselves. They're usually very soft in nature. They're usually really soft, beautiful, quiet songs is the only way I can describe them. They might crescendo, they might reach a peak in the progression, but in general, they're quite soft. And then sometimes in the tourist settings, you might have all sorts of like bells and whistles and drums and everything playing. So if you're looking at that song as the function being to communicate with the plant, and the plant is a soft entity, unlike the human that can't necessarily speak, might communicate in softer ways, then someone using drums and bells and instruments isn't actually communicating with the plant, it's putting in a performance. So that's, I suppose, as my personal journey with plants as well has gone more into the technical knowledge behind how these plants work and how to operate them. These two things don't really seem compatible. And this seems more like putting on a performance, which might have therapeutic effect, but in a different way that might not necessarily be connecting the patient to the plant.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. Like
Okay.
that's what it is. Yeah. No, I'm just trying to dig into this even more because I think you have such a unique perspective in being the Amazon. You were mentioning also like malpractice and shamans. I didn't realize that this was such an issue or problem, so much so that you didn't even blink an eye when you heard about the last one. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
It's pretty gruesome, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's pretty,
You become
that's bad.
desensitized to it.
Honestly, yeah. Blinked an eye and I blinked an eye and almost, yeah. Yeah, it's really sad. I don't want to think that way. I'm being honest, I don't
Yes.
want to think that way, but it's just, I've heard it, I've seen it. It's just a thing. What I say about this, there's a fantastic article actually that I came across when I came back to New Zealand. And that article talks about, it's by Evhina Futo. She's an anthropologist. And she talks about her personal fieldwork in 2010, where she came across all of these things that were happening. And how she reached this point in her fieldwork where she went from almost a naive researcher, where you're in the field and you're listening to all these things around you, until she realized these weren't actually stories. These were very, I suppose one of the most popular cultural concepts I came across in the Amazon was this idea of sorcery or witchcraft or malintentions. And she articulates this beautifully. Like she talks about, yeah, she'd heard it. And then eventually she reached a tipping point where those things were no longer false per se. So I came across her article, which is interesting. And I've also been thinking a lot about this in terms of we're researching a lot of psychedelics, we're researching a lot of plants in the Amazon that are used to heal. We're looking at their healing potentials. And I don't think we can even, at this point, we don't really ignore the significance of the practitioner and being able to navigate these plants. But what I've also enjoyed is reading about people who are taking plants from the Amazon, ethnobotanists, for instance, who are taking plants in the Amazon and then putting them in the lab and seeing what's happened. So one of my favorite recent articles is by Glenn Shepherd and Lewis Daly, and they look at this plant that an Amazonian practitioner tells them is used in malpractice to harm people. And this guy's drawn this out on a bit of paper, and they take it into the lab and they take it under the microscope and they see the exact crystalline structures that he's drawn out on this piece of paper. And when they analyze these structures further, they find that they're literally used to permeate the membranes of cells. So they're quite literally used to harm. So what I'm trying to get at, I suppose, here is that what I realized or what I came across in my fieldwork was, as there are lineages of practitioners that are working in a positive healing way, there is also this other side of the technical knowledge that is quite harmful. And there are plants that also support that in their function. So permeating cell membranes, or whereas the harmony alkaloids associated with ayahuasca are seen to be quite healing and repairing the body. And so, yeah, it was this duality that I came across, and it's sad. And unfortunately, with the lucrative industry, I think that it can encourage potential malpractice in a greater way than if there wasn't such an incentive.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Okay, this retreats and different things like that have become much bigger business. And you're seeing more people from other countries coming into different places like the Amazon to experience these things. And whenever you have money flowing into a system that wasn't flowing the way it was before, you're going to have bad actors, I think, at some point. And almost, it's unfortunate to say, it's just like when anything gets really big, it almost like breeds a little bit of that on some level. Unfortunately, it's the nature of people in some ways to exploit things, even if it's something you're like, wow, this is sacred. This has this great ancient history. Unfortunately, people see that and go, yeah, that's great. But this is making a lot of money, or this is a booming. So then they like move that aspect out of the way for the purpose of marketing it and making money.
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. It's quite sad to see, actually. And I will also make one other note, though, is that the people I've noticed who do perhaps work in these sorts of ways, often they are quite under-practiced themselves. So they haven't undergone a sufficient training, which is quite lengthy. So it's 3 to 5 years of taking very intense plants in isolation. They often haven't done that themselves, which leads to a shaky practice anyways, because if you are facilitating a psychedelic experience, you do have a lot of power in that experience. And if you don't have the training and the backbone to back that up and hold yourself accountable, what are you doing? There's also a personal risk there. With them might start with good intentions, but without the backbone, how's that going to show? So yeah, I have noticed that they were insufficient practice or insufficient apprentices there. Yeah.
Yeah.
But having said that, on the other side, there are people who have preserved their tradition and who do work in a very, very nice way. As
Yeah.
you said, it's just unfortunate.
It is unfortunate, but it also speaks to this. I've talked to someone else about, actually several people. It's no matter what it is, whether you're leading something very sacred or you're leading something very institutionally powerful, a lot of times that person ascends to become the guru of that. And I call it like this guru syndrome. So once you create this power over a lot of people, then the opportunity for malpractice skyrockets completely, because you realize you have power over people. Like they're coming, they're doing whatever you tell them to do. And this kind of lack of maybe understanding the power, but also just this insidious act of knowing you have the power and then exploiting it. And so this is ripe for it. This is ripe for that guru syndrome. It's like yoga or politics. Certain things, just like it is ripe for the taking for that type of thing.
Absolutely. Yep. And then once ayahuasca can be such a powerful tool as well that really just amplifies that.
So then you add the tool, the substance, the medicine creates just powerful change in people. And then they not only associate the substance, the medicine, they associate the person providing it. And then you have this double whammy of, man, this is it for me. So then then you turn off your prefrontal cortex and you go on, you don't make good decisions anymore. You just follow the guru at this point.
Absolutely. So part of my thesis as well has been to investigate the rights of apprenticeship, which I feel are quite crucial in making sure you've got a good practitioner. You get a practitioner with a solid backbone, it's very unlikely they're going to stray. But even though people might put this idea of, oh, you're the guru, I'm going to follow you. whatever. Ideally, with a good practitioner, they won't sway with that.
Yeah.
That won't go to their head, and they'll be able to say
Right.
central in their practice. That
Yeah. Honestly,
yeah.
this feels so much like my industry in fitness. Again, another
Oh
easy
yeah.
pathway for this. Someone ascends and there's almost no regulation, hardly any regulation in my industry. And I don't know what it is in psychedelics, but in the early days of this modern version of it, it feels like the Wild West a little bit.
Yeah.
So there are going to be people who are going to take advantage of that lack of regulation or apprenticeship and things of that nature.
100%. Yeah.
It's, I hate to say it's bound to happen, but obviously
Mm.
I think a good industry tries to do whatever it can to mitigate those instances for that. But I wanted to jump in too, because about this, your experience in the Amazon, because I think the listeners have no clue, me included, what's happening in the Amazon. They just hear stories and stuff. So I would love to get what's your firsthand account of being in the Amazon for so long. What's the environment like? And is it much different, you think, than what people's perception of it is?
Yeah, I suppose I'll break down exactly what I did because, yeah. So basically, like I mentioned, I was in the Amazon for 1 year. I was initially staying with some people that I'd known for 8 years. They're called the Indio Kichwas. They're in the highland jungle of the Amazon, which is beautiful. This is where like the jungle meets the mountain. That reflected in the instruments as well. So like you get some mountain instruments coming through there. The pan flute's lovely. You get some beautiful crops. Very peaceful, very nice. Beautiful dress as well. So the women wear these colorful dresses with these beautiful silks that are attached to it. The native culture's protected pretty well, you'd say. So this is actually a good example of how tourism has been working with it. So you often get tourists that come in from Lima, for instance, like local tourists, and they'll come in the evenings by bus, and in the village they'll do dances or they'll share food and stuff like that. So that's where they're getting finances, and then those finances go towards cultural preservation, and the culture is really well maintained. That's really beautiful. And what would I say about how the Amazon was happening? While I was there, there were some political issues in Peru. So I think that was towards the start of my fieldwork. That meant that quite a few roads around us got shut off. We couldn't actually leave. Everything was quarantined. Being in the middle of the jungle, in the middle of the mountains, that was fine. So I've been talking about the village here, but where I personally stayed was about 45 minutes into the mountains, walking from the village. I lived in the traditional jungle hut, which is called a tambo. You've got your palm leaf roofs, open air, so open air in the jungle. Yeah, it's pretty fresh living. Mosquito net, of course. And we'd also hold the ceremonies out on the land. So the ceremonies aren't really part of daily life. It's more of a sacred domain that exists out on the land. Although I talked about these ceremonies being quite basic, every single part of it is potent. Yeah, every single part, like even the location choice, everything about that. So we constructed this Malacca while I was there. And they put all the palm leaves on, and to open the space, we cooked the ayahuasca in it, and we had an opening ceremony as well, which was quite beautiful. But what else is going on in Peru, in the Amazon? You see the introduction of heavy machinery, unfortunately, so that started to come in at points. It's sad. I've been going to this particular region for 8 years. I've seen the effects of large roads happen. So when I was there first time 8 years ago, this beautiful village that was quite a while away, they'd just started carving out a dirt road, and now that dirt road over 8 years has become a concrete road, which means that all of the surrounding jungle around it has been cultivated to sell for plots of land. So before, when that was really cold, it was actually quite cold and nice to go through that bit of the jungle. It's now hot because there are no big trees. That's really sad. To me, this comes back once again to our previous conversation about apprenticeships and not having sufficient training and stuff. I see these apprenticeships as losing their backbone as well, similar to what's happening in the jungle, is losing the trees around them. Because as part of really intense apprenticeships, you will be required sometimes to take some of the intense trees of the Amazon. So that's part of the diets that you have to take. And as I see them being cut down around me, I'm like, oh, I can actually see this in the practitioners that are coming out now. And these intense trees aren't easy to take. You have to go into isolation. You have to do very strong restrictions. So yeah, that's a little sad. But of course, that opens up opportunities for trade. And so you have to think of both sides of that. What else is happening in the Amazon? Is there anything specifically that I suppose I spent quite a I spent my life on land. I was making the brew. I was gathering the plants. I was
Yeah.
doing my own personal dietetics while I was there to learn from the plants and the practitioners. So, yeah, is there anything in particular?
I just think there's a perception issue for, let's say, someone like me who's never been to the Amazon. And a
Yeah.
lot of people, like in North America and stuff, they just, especially United States, the Amazon's an idea to people.
Mm,
And it's, oh, lungs of the planet. You watch
mm,
documentaries and all this stuff, but there's not I don't think people have a good understanding of the lived experience of people in the Amazon, the environment, things of that nature. And because I think it sounds exotic when you talk about it, is, oh, the Amazon
mm,
forest. What's that? So it's good to get, that was perfect what you said about like the basically almost this more westernization of life, going from dirt roads to concrete roads and these beautiful plants that are being like, so what I've heard a lot about is deforestation in the Amazon.
mm.
And I'm curious, is it as big of a problem as maybe it's been reported to be? Or I don't know. That's why I want to talk to people who are actually there.
Yeah.
You know?
I think it's weird. I'm not gonna lie, it's really weird because I think you and I were having this conversation, right? I think on a fundamental level, we can both agree that deforestation isn't good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's weird being in environments where that perception slightly shifted, like
Mm.
where that I and as a researcher, I'm observant. I sit, observe, I take my notes. I'm here to just take in information. Of course, I engage with my environment as appropriate because otherwise that'd be weird. No. Yeah. So I came across some deforestation projects while I was there as well. Um, yeah, like large scale ones as well, foreign investors who are looking to buy up large bits of land, but also like local people as well. Yeah, which was interesting because I think we
Interesting.
often place the yeah, so we often place the blame on the foreign person, but also there is a local handshake that happens. Yep, local handshakes, and once again, there are people obvious like there's a lot of variance in that where there are people who do not think this is very appropriate and to go down to their community, and other people who will very happily shake someone's hand about it. So that's the part of the picture that on the ground revealed to me. I'd say that perhaps the Amazon it's a beautiful place, and I think there's a lot to learn from it. There's a lot to learn from the people there as well, who have preserved their traditions and their medicines for so long. But it's also, as much as it's this beautiful, luscious jungle, it's also an underbelly. Like it can hold a lot of things can happen there that aren't necessarily regulated or so I became really familiar with this underbelly that's happening at the same time. Yeah, so deforestation, it's unfortunately happening. It's
Yeah.
complicated, like I said. You think about these roads, this beautiful village that was in the mountains, it now has a lot more economic funding. But at the same time, that entire road to that village in the mountains is now incredibly hot. Like you can't stand outside
Yeah.
because there's no shelter. Like that's, I think, what
Right.
kind of screams to me is how intensely hot it gets when you remove the trees. Like the heat is, and the trees, these beautiful protections. So yeah, you feel it in terms of like global warming. I think is also, or climate change, I should say, there is actually quite obvious because the people there live very closely with the rhythms of the land. So a lot of my friends there are agriculturalists, and I actually learned quite a bit of agriculture, how to select good plants, like how to grow some good cacao. Super knowledgeable and like also very observant in how they do things. They're taught like a practical scientific method is how they've developed the agriculture. But having talked to my friends, like their rainy season, which used to start on the day, is now 3 weeks delayed, 1 month delayed. And that started happening for them in 2019, 2020, when I was there on my last round of field work. So yeah, we're unfortunately seeing a lot of change. I do hear that when you think it's exotic and a lot of people haven't been there, probably I think quite a beautiful place to visit as well. There's some really cool ecological projects. Where I was staying, they've got this project where they're trying to return the soil back to pre-colonial Incan soil, so black soil, which is super nutrient dense. Cool eco lodges, like the eco side of tourism can be really cool in the Amazon
Yeah.
as well. Just two sides of this picture.
Yeah. I thought that was masterfully said when you said let's can both agree that deforestation is not great, for sure. But then you followed it up with it's complicated too. I feel like that's mostly what life is like. I think you have an idea of what's right and wrong, and hey, this isn't good. We can all agree this isn't good, but we can all also feel that it's more nuanced than just
Mm.
this concrete thing for that. So that I think was interesting. The local handshake, that actually makes a lot of sense to me because on some sense, we will demonize the outside folks coming in doing things, but a lot of that stuff also doesn't happen unless people on the ground there agree to it too on some level. So they want something out of that new structure as well, or whether it's economic aspects. I guess it comes down to like we're colliding with this ancient traditions, integrity, but hope for the future and technologies. All this stuff wrapped up into one. So it makes me think, how do you see this playing out in the world of hallucinogenics? Because clearly it's undergone this massive explosion of exposure,
Yes.
marketing, and actual experience for that. Where is this heading?
Yeah. Wonderful question, Darian. I spend lots of time thinking about this. Since fraternity, I've started an organization at my home university, the Student Association of Psychedelic Investigation. And that's been nice to get students and academics on board and have these discussions. And we've thought quite a bit about where we're heading with psychedelics. Um, for me, it's not even, it's the psychedelic plays an important role, but really what I've been investigating in my research and in my research career is ontologies, so worldviews. And I'm looking at the Amazon to see how their worldview changes or how does the psychedelic, an intense psychedelic substance that we can access, if I'm in the Amazon, I can access that so easily, at least twice a week with someone I can trust. So how does that shift my worldview? And if people are taking the psychedelic, how does that play out in their society? What sort of ripples do I see? The Amazon to me is a great way to look at this. And I almost have reached, I think the psychedelic is incredibly important. It plays a lot of very important roles in connecting the human to nature and connecting them to themselves, conflict resolution, personal development, growth, even like physical attributes as well. But all of these things bleed out into the environment as well. So I've found with communities, for instance, that do use ayahuasca quite regularly, they often have a lot of care for their natural environment as well, and like a really beautiful relationship with plants. So these are the cultivators that I'm talking about, like where they have
Yeah.
learned how cacao works, where they sit and they observe, where they take their notes, they want to get the best harvest. This really tender, loving relationship with nature, which of course gives back to them because then you get cacao that you can sell. And that's a rich fruit as well. Like you can make a decent amount out of all the fruit in the jungle you can grow. That's pretty decent. So how do I see this playing out? In those particular examples, there's a really good integration between the psychedelic and the worldview. It plays out really nicely in their environment. In the West, or how it's being integrated in the West, I don't know if it's being integrated in the West. It is. I'm just going to be honest. I don't know if it is. I
Yeah.
think for me, on my personal journey, I formally began an apprenticeship with traditional medicines in 2019 before I started at the start of my advanced studies and advanced degrees. And my thesis has served the role of being 100,000 words of integration, which has been really important. When I come across psychedelics in the West, I don't know if I hear much about integration. I hear it being thrown around left and center right now, but I'm still confused as to what the actual process is. Do we even have an environment where this can be integrated in? And when I say, do we have an environment, does our everyday existence support the integration of a psychedelic or a big world shift? Or, yeah, can that fit within our worldview or ontology? Can we have enough space for this? Can we make space? Are the questions that I'm looking to answer. And I don't, yeah, I think that the psychedelic needs to have the integration to be effective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is so let me make sure I hear what you're saying. Basically, because the access is pretty easy for the most part compared to other places in the Amazon, like I said, twice a week, I'm like, whoa. Like you see the effects of how people see nature based off of their regular access and usage to hallucinogenic medicine and how that alters the landscape of that environment. Is that kind of what you're saying? That people actually see themselves as part of nature and the cycle of it and not outside of it?
Yeah, that's one example of how their natural environment facilitates the integration and allows them to actually physically put into practice the stuff they're learning from their psychedelic experience.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense to me. I also think another layer to that, obviously, this is not my area, but just my own personal experiences. I think it confirms this idea that people crave altered realities. And
Okay.
this altered reality is, I wouldn't say necessarily an escape, but it's like an illumination that these other
Mm.
areas exist and it's not so binary. That's what I feel I think that would be a great study to me. It's not just like the altered consciousness, but just like the desire and need for humans to understand that there's multiple layers of existence for that.
Mm.
And really, I don't know, I would love to see that. I think we talk about that in the West, definitely talk about it. There's shows about it, but maybe it's necessary that we need to be informed about all these alternate realities for that.
Mm.
And not even just like comparing it to alternate realities of under hallucinogenics, different animals have different realities. Children have a
Mm.
different reality than
Mhm.
adults. All these, maybe a lot of life is an altered consciousness on a regular basis and like accepting that, you know?
I love what you said. Loved it. One of the worldview theories that I'm looking into right now is called multinatural perspectivism. And a quote which described what you said about the animals having different perspectives. And a quote that I recently read was about that worldview and how instead of looking at multiculturalism, it looks at multinaturalism. So each species, each plant, each entity has their own way of seeing the world. And I think that allows I feel like this conversation has brought out actually a lot of texture, and those sorts of perspectives allow for texture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a good word, texture, because I think like how my dog sees the world is differently than how I see it because we're different species, but two, we may have the same physical landscape,
Mm.
but I think our visual landscape and how we act, my dog smells 30,000 times better than me. So what's their life in terms of odors and smells?
Mm.
That's a different consciousness than I'm experiencing. So almost this kind of like gaining respect that there are different conscious environments. So there was a recent article that came out, you may have seen it, about how like most animals have sentience. They have a level of awakening that we didn't think was possible. We know that bees purposely play, fish actually recognize themselves and other people around them. There's like behaviors of play and interaction that we didn't think existed. And animals and plants, trees talking to each other, providing nutrients to each other based off of the stimuli. A lot of this happening underneath the ground, a different reality than we're
Mm.
experiencing. And I think that
Mhm.
these substances give us access to these different realities. To me, my personal experiences have given me access to tree realities. I know this sounds crazy. I'm saying a little bit. I feel like I connected with trees in their reality when I was underneath this influence. Without it, I don't
Mhm.
have that connection. It's not as deep. So, you see, does that make
Mm.
sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course you do.
Yeah.
You're in this whole thing. Anybody that I meet that's doing, that's as has had an experience, they walk differently on the planet. I just noticed that. You ever
Yeah,
notice that?
interesting.
Maybe you're so deeply in it, but I don't know. Like
Nah, I
I noticed
love
that.
it. I have this thing about people who have drunk ayahuasca for the first time and they've got a sparkle in their eye, and it's the most
Yeah.
beautiful thing.
Yeah. I feel
Stunning.
like you see the
Yeah.
beauty in people, like the inner beauty outside of them. When you've known people that have been a part of doing ceremonies and things of that nature, you're like, oh, there you are.
Mm,
There you are.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I love what you said. They walk different. They do.
Just
Yeah.
walk differently. Yeah. And I
I
know it
see.
immediately.
Yeah.
I see it immediately.
Yeah.
I'm like, you've been doing
I
something
got
different.
you.
I not you. It's just the
Yeah.
behavior changes, how you walk. You just glow. The sparkle.
Like a
There's a
lightness
different,
as
there's a
well.
light. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
want it
there's an
for everyone.
ease, there's a playfulness, fun thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I absolutely love what you said about your dog as well, about the 30,000. He smells 30,000 times better than you.
Yeah.
It's true. They're different realities, different
It's different reality.
consciousness.
Yeah. I mean, the
Yeah.
way a bee sees life and the different
Imagine.
imaging, I have no
Yeah.
access to that reality. I
Yeah.
wish I did. I would love to experience it. I just think because humans are very egocentric. They're very defined by our ego. So our ego creates this reality that like we're the center of everything.
Yeah.
Me. And I think the value of a lot of this work and ceremonies, you start chipping away at that. Maybe I'm not the center of the universe.
Yeah. As I come back to your question about the Amazon, I think that's why I like the Amazon so much. I'm so drawn to it. It's because it's huge, it's vast. If the weather changes, you're not doing anything, there's going to be a huge storm, and what are you going to do? So it reminds me of that. Like, I've got no place. Yeah. Like, it facilitates very nicely.
Yeah. I like that you've got your
Yeah.
place. I think it
Yeah.
crystallizes your place in the cosmos and the universe.
Yeah.
And that becomes very clear. And I think it's not very clear for a lot of people. Again, it becomes like it's about me, actually. And I'm like, that's like, there's a very closed-minded approach walking the planet to me. So that walking differently, I always interpret that as this person realizes they're both very significant and insignificant at the same time. And they've accepted that.
I also will add on to that, there's something about the beauty. Like, they show the beauty in themselves, but they also feel the beauty around them. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just deep, right? Because you start thinking,
Yeah.
why are you not showing the true beauty of yourself? And it's just, there's these walls, there's these layers. That's what I've learned from my experiences. There's just a lot of walls and layers, whatever these guardrails are. When I take down these, I become who I should be, who this person, I let that beauty explode out of me versus keeping it in. Yeah.
Beautiful. We love to see it. We love to see it. This popped into my head recently when you were talking about that. So my main field participant, who's a maestro, he was telling me about his personal journeys. He tells me little bits here and there as we talk. It comes out over time. One of the things he told me about was how he learned self-love through the plants. It's really beautiful. I learned a lot about, I suppose, masculinity as well and gender while I was there, because I was in a male-dominated environment, whereas I'm usually the only woman. Yeah,
Really?
and because knowledge of plants and like plant expertise is usually held by men, apart from hello to me.
I tell you what, history is the same everywhere. I swear.
It's
Pretty
interesting,
patriarchal.
yeah. But so I'm usually around a lot of men, and I spent my year with a lot of men who are quite masculine in their own ways. So to hear him say something so soft, oh, that's what I learned from the plant, was actually one of self-love and like self-compassionate. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've also noticed his role as, so he leads the ceremonies and he's one of the main maestros in that area. Even when other men come to the ceremonies, he will often have like really nice mentoring chats with them. So yeah, I had a lot of observations about those as well. But the plant can show you a lot of things, as can other psychedelics as well. But yeah, it's a lot about connecting with yourself. I
Yeah.
love what you said, letting that beauty shine out.
Just let it just explode out. And I think the gender
Absolutely.
thing is interesting to me because I felt like, gosh, it was a long time ago, my first experience, but felt like I stopped thinking about myself as like how to be a man.
Yeah.
I stopped that kind of socialized, institutionalized projection of manliness. Like it just faded away from me. I was like, I don't know. What's a man? What's a real man? I think there's a socialized version of that the minute you're born. And especially, it could be for females too. What's a real woman or something? How you're told and different, especially in Western culture, it's very much like locked in. And I think we're breaking that down. But I no longer associate myself. It's not that I ever had a lot of this before, but just like this machismo, toughness, like it just seems irrelevant to me. honestly. It has nothing to do with, I think it's toxic or something like that. It's just, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. I don't need to play this role. That's what I think the plants taught me is I don't need to perform, have this performative function that I need to have this because I'm a man. I was like, I need to be a good human. Like,
Mm,
I'm a human first. And how do I treat my environment is a huge part of my humanity, is for that.
yeah. Yeah, 100%. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
most definitely. It's drastically changed my life, like drastically.
Yeah.
Like, and I was okay with that. I was like, I'm not worried about the control aspect. I was just like, oh, this is great.
Mm,
Like, I went from not being into gardening to becoming a very serious gardener. I like
yeah.
love it, growing my own stuff, and from eating a tremendous amount of meat to being plant based, like
Yeah.
all for animal welfare, environmental situations. I'm in a health field. Had nothing to do with health for me. Nothing. Like
Interesting.
zero. I don't even care about that. That's a nice side effect.
Yeah.
It was more about how I felt about the welfare of other people and things, plants, animals, and things. I had zero of
Yeah.
that before that. I'm talking zero. You'd have met me like 10 years ago, you'd be like, this is not the same person.
We love to see the growth though. Yeah.
But your work is fantastic to me. And what is it that you're aiming to move towards with this, your study? Where do you want this study to move on towards? I know you talked a little about ontology, but what's
Mm.
the next thing for you?
Yeah. So what's the next thing? The thesis is nice. I like the thesis. It's getting quite deep, which is what I wanted it to reflect my 8 years of experience. I want that to come through. It's going a lot into the process. It's going a lot into the ritual, the extended process of dietary restrictions, behavioral restrictions that help integrate the plant with the body, and then rites of apprenticeship as well that encapsulate that. Where do I want to go from there? I want to see a bit of a shift in how we interact with psychedelics. So, as I've mentioned, I'm very keen on the integration, the shift in worldview, being able to have a container to hold someone's shift in worldview. That's a big task. That's huge. That's
I love that.
phenomenal. That's life changing, quite literally life changing
Yeah,
when someone's
seriously.
worldview shifts.
Yeah.
And how can you safely integrate that so they can go forward, they can achieve what they want to achieve in life, they can be happy, they can be whatever their definition of successful is. And that's going to vary person to person. So those are the sorts of fields that I'm working towards. Ideally, personally, I'd keep my relationship with the Amazon because I love the Amazon. I love the plants. I realized from my research as well that ayahuasca is the beginning. So I'm excited to explore that further with other plants. And I've mentioned that I started the association this year as well. So I'll be looking to take that forward next year and towards the tail end of this year as well. But yeah, just some really good research, some really good collaboration as well with experts in the field. And by experts in the field, traditional practitioners who've been doing this for generations, which I feel like psychedelic science could use a lot more of. Yeah. So
That's wonderful.
onwards and upwards. Yeah.
Onwards and upwards. And I feel really honored that I've met you on this part of your journey. And I would just love it over time. We could reconvene again down the line as you learn more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cause I always find I learn a lot. And man, I tell you what, that space for change in worldview, I've never heard anyone say that before that. That's new to me to hear that, but I think intuitively we all feel that. So that's awesome. I want to know more about that next time.
Hey, thanks, Darren. And it's such a pleasure to be back on your show as well. And thanks again for everything you've shared. Like, I've gone away, I've taken some notes. I've really learned something from here as well. And yeah, I look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, for sure. And any way that people can get in touch with you or learn more about the different things you're doing, please let everyone know.
Yeah, cool. So my Twitter handle is Beckplants, BEKPLANTS. That's the same for my blog, which is beckplants.wordpress.com. What else? Instagram's the same. LinkedIn is Rebekah Senanayake. I'll put that in the show notes. And yeah, flick me an email, stay in touch. If you've got ideas, if you want to chat more, yeah.
No doubt about it.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Rebekah. And certainly we'll be back in touch. This is awesome. So
Awesome. Thanks, Darian.